I'm Brian Hubbard.
And I'm Lynn McTaggart.
And we are What Doctors Don't Tell You. And welcome to this, our very latest podcast, vlog, and yet again, Facebook Live. Hello, Facebook Livers. What Doctors Don't Tell You has been published continually since 1989, and this is our latest issue is just out in the stores. I'll hold it up for the Facebook people to see, although it's back to front. So having researched medicine for quite as long as we have, we always have something interesting to say about the latest health news. So let's get cracking with the first item. This one's been rumbling around for a couple of years, but it's picking up a bit of a head of steam of late. It goes back to 2012, in fact, when in Australia, the National Health and Medical Research Council decided to ask for an independent review of homeopathy. Does it work? Everyone says it doesn't, so they wanted to find out for themselves. They recruited an Australian university who found 171 studies that demonstrated that indeed homeopathy is of some use. It's effective against a whole range of various conditions. But this was never published. The council then said, well, we weren't happy with this, even though the independent monitor who was looking for the effectiveness, the validity, if you like, of the science behind the study, said, I'm impressed by the rigour, thoroughness and systematic approach given to this evaluation. Overall, a lot of excellent work has gone into this review, and the results are presented in a systematic, unbiased and convincing manner. Nonetheless, it never was published. So the Research Council then decided to recruit a different set of researchers and at the same time seriously raise the scientific bar. And they said, look, no study that doesn't involve at least, I think it was about 170 people, or 150 people, could be allowed in. And of course, all of a sudden, they couldn't find any studies, bar 5. They only found 5 studies that met this very rigid criteria, and none of them found that homeopathy worked. And so the Research Council finally came out in 2015 and said, well, there you are, homeopathy doesn't work. It's worth bearing in mind this bar that they raise is not one that they use in conventional drug research.
Yeah, we wouldn't have many studies, Brian, if we only had studies that included 150 people or more.
Right. So anyway, the upshot of all this is that various groups, the homeopathy groups, are now campaigning to have the first study published. And we'll tell you the website and the URL to go to register your vote on that as well. But what do you make of all that, Lynn?
Well, I mean, it's outrageous, and it's the usual double standard that's applied to alternative medicine. I mean, first of all, we should say there are a lot of studies of homeopathy demonstrating proof. I mean, Switzerland decided to do a very rigorous study of homeopathy to decide whether or not to include it on its National Health Service. And they came out with many, many studies demonstrating that it works for certain conditions. And that's only because those certain conditions had been well studied. But the upshot was that it said, yes, there's enough evidence for us to include this on the National Health. Well, that's big. And that was, certainly they were looking to save money, so they would have tried to find, as many flaws as possible, but they couldn't because they had an independent reviewer, and a good scientific team looking at the overall evidence. This was dirty pool. This was obviously dirty pool. They set out to debunk alternative medicine and homeopathy, and they succeeded by creating such tiny and tight criteria that nothing could fit through. I mean, this has been the subject of a documentary about homeopathy, and they talked to many of the people who have researched the other papers and demonstrated that there are good studies for homeopathy. And of course, there are, this is the same kind of thing that's happening in Britain with certain skeptic organizations trying to close down homeopathy and not allow it as part of the national health.
Yeah, that movie is called Just a Drop, I think, just to mention if anyone who wants to catch it. Well worth seeing.
Absolutely. And here's the interesting thing. They keep trying to kill homeopathy by saying there's no evidence for it. So here's my challenge. I think if we're going to go by that criteria, that there's no evidence, I say we should get rid of and eliminate any kind of medicine that hasn't been conclusively proven. And I think that you'd find that most drugstores would be they'd clear the shelves because most of that stuff hasn't been adequately proven, or the studies have been so tainted that they're really worthless.
Yeah. Well, the BMJ Clinical Excellence Report demonstrated just that only about 30% of conventional treatments and drugs are absolutely proven to be of benefit. It's that low. And I think it's almost like it's all back to front, isn't it, with homeopathy? I think what it is that the science community says it's impossible for this to work, therefore it doesn't.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much evidence demonstrates that it is working, even if we don't actually understand quite why it should work, but it does work. And so therefore it doesn't fit with the scientific view of who we are and how science works, so therefore it can't possibly work. And that seems to be the mindset we're dealing with here.
Well, I mean, that's the mindset generally in science too. It can't work. That was the mindset that they thought about meteors. They said at the time when meteors were first discovered, well, stones don't come from the sky because stones can't fly from the sky. And it was just that. It was just scientific ignorance. And that's all we're really demonstrating now. According to our old, out-of-date materialist view of the way the body works, we think homeopathy can't work. But if you look at new science, Brian, and you look at all of the new science demonstrating that water is like a tape recorder. Scientists have demonstrated water has a thing called coherent domains that kind of cluster around other molecules or information, as is the case in homeopathy, and essentially record it. And when we start looking at that kind of new evidence that's being collected by people like Luc Montagnier, the co-discoverer of AIDS, the AIDS virus, you start realizing that the problem isn't homeopathy. The problem is the scientific paradigm. When you open that up and you start looking at this in a wider way with the newer science, it all makes sense.
And it's worth I'll now bore everybody for 20 seconds about the history of the pharmaceutical industry. And it sort of came out of the petrochemical industry in the 20s and the 30s. And more importantly, it came about during the age of when they were able to mass produce things. And when you have mass production, so they were able to mass produce these chemical compounds. And what they needed was a demonstration that it would work for everyone. But the trouble is they were mass producing all sorts of things at the time. Bicycles, cars, and these are fine for people because we all get into the same car and drive it off. But it doesn't seem to work so well with these chemical compounds. Why? Because we're all unique. We are biochemically unique beings, so therefore these pills aren't necessarily going to work so well for you as they might for me. And but nonetheless they had to demonstrate this. So they invented this double-blind placebo-controlled study, big controlled studies to demonstrate these things work. And of course they discovered that it didn't, and which is why you see more fraud in medical research than any other branch of science. And and that's why homeopathy sort of says, well, okay, we are demonstrating that it does work according to your measures, but actually that's not how we would measure it anyway, because we know you can't mass produce this stuff. It's individual. And that's the point of homeopathy and a lot of alternative systems, that they are for the individual and not for the mass, because you and I could go to see that same homeopath with similar presenting symptoms and walk away with a completely different remedy, depending on your need compared to my need. And this is the reality. And it's something that medicine is slowly accepting, because now they can alter it and customize drugs for the individual. But until that day comes when they really can do this properly, they're going to stick to this. And they're going to insist that the homeopaths follow the same measure, which is a nonsense.
Absolutely.
Look, so anyway, so if you want to see this first paper published, you have to go to a website called releasethefirstreport.com and add your name to the petition to get this this paper published. So that's releasethefirstreport, all one word, .com. And whilst on the subject of URLs, don't forget us, WDDTY.com. And if you want to give away a free gift, it's /giveaway, all one word, GIVEAWAY, where we have a free gift of some good health tips for you in exchange for your precious email address. So nip over there and nip over to the Release the First Report site as well. And, well, we're going to carry on with our podcast, but you Facebook Livers, thank you for watching, and au revoir till next time.
Bye.